Hello, my name is Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member and Chair of the Taskforce to Reimagine Policing in Brookline. This is our meeting for September 18th, 2020. Welcome to all. We do have a busy agenda today where I hope we can make some headway in terms of our focus areas that may turn into subcommittee work. We've got a presentation from Dan O'Leary on crime rates, as well as calls for service to the police department, and also want to continue our conversation about the September 30th joint public hearing with the Select Board's Committee on Policing Reforms. I did, however, want to start by saying a few other words that I didn't expect that I would have to say today, and to comment on a matter that happened this week. At this Wednesday's meeting of the Select Board's Committee on Policing Reform, Bernard Green, the chair of that committee and of the Select Board, when introducing the topic of a chokehold ban, a ban which he has proposed, inexplicably wrapped his hand around his neck in a choking motion and made a choking sound while laughing. He did in the moment acknowledge that his actions weren't funny, an understatement to say the least, and has since apologized for what he called, quote, a lapse and, quote, inappropriate. Let me be clear. The chair's actions were far beyond inappropriate. This type of behavior is unconscionable, unacceptable, and inexcusable no matter who is doing it. That the person who somehow thought chokeholds were a laughing matter happens to be a Black man is frankly bewildering. That the same person is the chair of a committee purporting to be serious about police reforms, as well as the chair of the Select Board, is beyond troubling and potentially disqualifying. The public needs to know that the Select Board and our committees on reform and reimagining understand the seriousness of this work and the existential threat that the current state of affairs poses to Black people and others. I want you to know that the callous behavior exhibited by Mr. Green will not be acceptable or excused by this task force. I can't imagine that anyone in this group would do anything so disturbing, but if you do, that will be your last meeting with us. I imagine we'll be discussing this at Tuesday's Select Board meeting. I'm certainly interested to hear what other board members have to say about this. I also want to provide an opportunity for you to share any thoughts you have on this before moving on to our regular business. So if there's anything you'd like to say, please go ahead and say it now. Hearing none. Let's move on. So the first order of business actually is to approve our minutes.
I know I sent those. This is Devin Williams. Good morning. I know I sent those a little late last night. So if you folks haven't had a chance to look them over in a sufficient manner, you can discuss the minutes. And if you'd like to make any edits now, or if you want to hold the vote until next week, that's totally up to you. I'll let the task force discuss, and then if you're ready to move forward, I'll do a roll call vote.
I'm good with holding the vote if others are okay with that. Any opposition to that? Let's go ahead and do that. It's go ahead, Eitan. Yeah.
Are they in the 9/18/20 materials?
Yes, I sent them last night. You should have received it around like 9 o'clock.
I don't think they're in that folder though. I mean, maybe, sorry, did you send them just as like an email attachment?
No, they should be in your packet.
Oh, packet. Got it. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Nope, that's okay. And they're also
okay.
I think in the folder.
Yeah, what I found is the folder is if I've had it open already and something gets added, I need to refresh also. So just keep that in mind for the future.
All right, so we will hold those minutes until next week.
Right. Sounds good. Okay, then moving on. We now have the task of continuing our work around these focus areas and really starting to move into figuring out how we're going to divvy up the work of this task force. We meet weekly, which is more frequent than many groups do. However, in order to meet the the very tight timeline that we have as a task force, subcommittee work, I think is going to be absolutely essential to really moving this work forward. So I wanted to start by just looking back at sort of where we were at the end of last week. Pulling up my own notes here. And so we had talked about certain focus areas and that I'd proposed. And I wanted, you know, you've had a chance to sort of sit back and want to see if there's any change to this, or if someone's got alternative proposal here. One around envisioning, and this is the sort of the task force that, I'm sorry, the subcommittee that would start to pull together members of the community, you know, through various efforts in community engagement, any kind of focus groups or surveys or town halls or things like that that we're doing for the collective good of the task force, would be led by this envisioning group, of course, with the support and buy-in and input from the rest of the task force. Second would be the larger sort of department-wide concerns. And, you know, I started by putting out a question. I'm curious to hear what questions you have, which would be, is the size of our, the size and scale and scope of our department appropriate for the size of the town of Brookline, the crime rates in Brookline, sort of really looking at the big picture, stepping back, big picture. Is this department right for our community as it stands? Then there was sort of the program level analyses that could take place. I'd mentioned a couple, like school resource officers, walk and talk. Folks have talked about traffic enforcement. You know, what are the objectives of those programs? Are those objectives rooted in community needs today? Are they meeting those objectives? If so, how? And of course, because our work is around reimagining, are there alternatives to perhaps meet those same objectives if we still believe that they are worthy objectives? And then finally, a fourth sort of grouping would be around specific issues. And those issues could include mental health, homelessness, domestic violence, and potentially other issues. The questions there are essentially looking specifically at the issues and trying to understand the prevalence of those issues, again, scope and scale here in Brookline, and what we think, if we were starting from scratch, how we might want to address issues related to mental health, homelessness, domestic violence, and others that you'll all come up with, and whether or not policing should be part of that strategy, and if so, how. So that's where we left off. I wanted to hear if there were any additional thoughts, anything that you felt was missing here. And then we can talk more about how we get from here to there, how we start to organize ourselves. But I'll open the floor first. Almas, I saw you unmute.
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I was trying to raise my hand and I didn't quite get there.
That's okay.
So I was just going to add, like when you talked about the functional areas, there was one other area that I thought about, which was the CERT. I think it's the community engagement. No, sorry, it's called
Envisioning?
Community Emergency Response Team. Like that's another functional area that I thought of, which I think we could somehow expand that as far as like doing other things, because you know, these are, I think, 250 volunteers that are trained. So that was like one other area I thought one could look at.
Okay. That's the CERT. Got it. Other thoughts?
Sorry, I had one more thought. I don't see anything here about like training or anything as far as like looking more specifically at training on racial bias issues, and maybe that comes into one of the department level analysis or something, but I'm not sure where that goes. You know, just looking more deeply into that.
Right. I think that goes with the reform committee.
Oh, that goes with the reform committee.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Hi, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning. I'm not sure this is separate from the envisioning and community engagement, but I think the idea that safety and public safety is an ecosystem. Therefore, as we think about the policing and how to move around, above, beyond, we need to think about the systems also that need to be built up around this. And I realize that's not the scope of what we're doing here, but I do think it's within, I think it's a necessary thing to keep in our minds because that's the other side of this. So recommendations of, recommendations of other social services that need to be strengthened to support the work that we're doing. Maybe. I'm not sure that's a separate category or a separate thought process, but definitely something that all of them need to keep in the back of their mind, I think.
Right. Can you say that again? The last piece.
I don't know. I'll try.
I may have to look back at the recording.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Public safety as an ecosystem. And so outside of all of this, there's a system of social supports that needs to be built up in order to support all the work that we're doing. Because, you know, much like when mental health institutions were broken down a while ago because horrors were taking place there, there was nothing to support people outside of those institutions when it happened. So for us to think about rerouting these ideas around policing without the supports, the more organic supports around social services is essential. I don't think I answered your question, but.
No, I think you did.
Just the fact that all of us need to keep that in our brains, that there needs to be other things besides breaking these portions of the police department down or rethinking them.
Right, and you know, with the understanding that there are certain things that that police have been asked to do or have you know, as a hot potato or taken over because they're either there's no other place to put that work or
Right.
or maybe no one's wanted to do it.
Right.
And so that's also part of all these other programs that you see, you know, police engaging in, and you say, why are they doing that? Aren't there other folks better fit to do that? And we've heard that from some police chiefs around the country that they agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right, that makes sense to me. Chi-Chi.
So my comment is much more on the micro level as opposed to Bonnie's comment about the big societal issues, and that is, so would you imagine that these subcommittees would be equally sized? You know, should we pick a subcommittee? When would they be meeting? You know, what would be the goal of each subcommittee? Sort of the logistics of it. I mean, the scope of them sounds good right now. I don't know if there'd be any opportunity for adjustment once we start thinking about the actual charge and mission and objectives of each subcommittee.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that. Let's hear from Ann first, and anyone else on like the sort of the list we have before us, and then I'm going to address that. Thanks, Chi-Chi. Ann?
And do you know, can you just check your output? We can't hear you, but it looks like you're unmuted. In the bottom left-hand corner, it should show the microphone. We cannot hear you. So you just need to make sure that your speaker and your microphone are, you know, the same as whatever system you're using, either a built-in microphone or if you want to plug in headphones.
Okay, and keep trying. I'm going to go to Malcolm, and we'll come back to you.
So I'm just asking really for clarification because I think, well, I have an answer in my mind. I want to make it clear. To me, when I think about reimagining, that's sort of a huge picture. So when I think about something like Bonnie mentioned, part of our reimagine might be budgetary, and even think about shifting funds or relocating funds, or even suggesting to shift numbers and departments within the police, right? So like, and part of the reason I mentioned that is like, I've had a hard time finding sort of a pay scale for Brookline police. I haven't looked very hard either, but you know, but like if we were to say we were going to remove 3 officers and replace them with 3 social workers, right? That's a budgetary thing. I may personally stand on it. I also don't know if those are actually equivalent, right? Like I don't know if removing 3 officers, their salaries equals the same as replacing them with 3 social workers. My immediate would be to say no, but I don't actually know that anyway. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm wondering if is that something we should actually bog ourselves down with? Are we just making this reimagining ideal not concerning things like that, or are we just saying, no, this is our imagination, this is what it is?
I mean, I'll just respond briefly, and I see Mike wants to get in on this as the chair of the advisory committee. You know, the way that I view our work is not being driven by the dollars. It's about figuring out how to best address the issues that our community faces and what role policing, if any, should play in that. Once we decide that we've got what we think is a reasonable alternative or a better alternative to the current standard, then we also need to do the work of figuring out what does that look like in dollars. What is the cost going to be? What does that look like in potentially a reduction on the police side and an increase elsewhere, the creation of new units or departments within, you know, anywhere from health to schools to somewhere else, potentially. And then we've also got to figure out what costs will be associated with that. Yeah. Mike?
Thank you.
I absolutely agree. I mean, the first thing is to figure out, you know, what is it that we think should be done, what should be changed, and so forth. Ultimately, you do have to deal with dollars because the number of dollars is pretty much fixed, and it's under a fair amount of pressure, and it always is. But I mean, particularly right now, it's under a fair amount of pressure because a big piece of the budget is local receipts, restaurant taxes from meals and parking meters and so forth, and all of that has gone down. But looking that, you have to look longer term than that. So I think it is important ultimately to look at the dollars, but for the moment, let's be open and free and think about what's the best way to do things.
Thanks, Mike. Kimberly.
Good morning, y'all. I wonder, well, now that I'm not sure if this is appropriate because I'm thinking about money as well. And when I think about reimagining policing, I also think about where the money goes. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I was just looking at the detail office. Are they spending $6 million a year on detailing? And if that's the case, why do we need officers to perform details? Why can't civilians do that? People who can be trained to do a detail, and putting $6 million in poor folks' pockets would be awesome. So that's one of the list of things that I feel like needs to be changed in policing, as well as the walk and talk and the school resource program. But I don't know, just a thought.
I think that's a fair question and an important area to zone in on. I've got to figure out whether or not that's something we're going to focus on, or the reform committee will focus on. I think somebody should. You know, certainly one of the concerns that I have is officers in particular doing a full detail shift and then rolling into working for us. and us getting the lesser. I mean, I know I'm not as good after working 8 hours to ask me to work another 8, and my job doesn't require near the level I would imagine of sensitivity that officers do. Their job does, and so that's an area of concern for me. Let me have a conversation, maybe even with the board, and figure out, you know, who's going to take that up. If the Committee on Reforms doesn't, then perhaps we will. But I think it's an important area to explore. Thanks. Anne, you're back. Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay. Sorry, I'm traveling and now I'm at my dad's apartment. So every time I'm logging into these meetings, I seem to be somewhere else in different Wi-Fi systems. I just wanted to follow up on what Bonnie was saying, because while I completely agree with Bonnie, I was also confused because I thought, in a sense, that's what we were doing here, is not so much coming up with business plans for alternative organizations, but that we were at least going to be researching them and suggesting alternatives as part of the work that we're doing here. So Bonnie, while I absolutely agree with you, I was confused because I thought, in a sense, that was part of our mission already. And I just wanted clarification around that.
Can I do that?
Yes, please.
So I think what I'm talking about are the reasons why our communities all across the country are in the states that we are. You know, the inability of our country to support all that human beings need to thrive is lacking. And so we're not trying to solve the entire nation, but when we remove mental health things from the police department, we might be removing the emergency calls, the 911, someone is in a horrible state calls, but we may not be addressing the state of mental health like in Brookline. So I guess it's not a super clear line, but I just want to think about the reasons why some instances of crime might happen broadly. I'm not awake this morning, so this is a very large topic for me to wrap my brain around and then help you wrap your brain around when I say these words. But am I making sense?
Absolutely. And I'm not awake this morning either. So that might be part of the issue. But
right.
I mean, I completely agree with you. I just, I wasn't sure what scope was, and I thought it was part of our scope.
Like I understand we're not going to also reimagine food insecurity and solving that problem. But to keep that in mind as a reason one or two other things might happen in town is important background information.
Right, I agree.
To add to these recommendations we might be doing. Like, we're gonna take this from the police department, theoretically, take this thing for this reason out of the police department because these resources are lacking. And so we're gonna build in this support, but please don't stop thinking about this resource being lacking.
Right.
Type of thing.
I get it. I agree. All right, thank you. I just needed to wrap my head around it a bit.
Yeah, it's early. It's been a long week.
Seriously. And just practically in terms of, I can see our recommendations, including, if we're thinking about, for instance, seems that the police do some work around trying to keep youth on the right path and youth engagement and stuff like that. It may be that this task force, says, the town needs to invest more in organizations. If that's a concern, if that's an area of concern, then organizations like the Brookline Teen Center and Steps to Success and other organizations like that. And maybe that's where we need to reinvest some funds. If that is a concern, I think it's a worthy objective, but that's something we need to look more into as well. Anyone else want to weigh in here? Kristen.
Yeah, I think building some on what I hear both from Anne and from Bonnie, one of the things that I would at least like us to consider is how we think about measuring the efficacy of our public safety, and in particular any interventions on the other side of this. So part of what I hear from Bonnie's points, that if we make a recommendation to the town and they were to implement that recommendation, it doesn't mean that magically things are going to be different immediately. So if food insecurity is still a problem, right, our interventions shouldn't be cast as something that, well, we still have this problem, therefore these reimagining public safety interventions didn't work and we shouldn't continue them. We need some way for us to also have the town consider what are we going to measure that tells us whether or not we're moving the right direction, and to allow us to keep calibrating the moves that we can make.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. That's important. Anyone else? Okay. This is all really helpful. I want to move to Chi-Chi's important question about the logistics of all of this and what this looks like. On sort of standing committees, subcommittees get created and sometimes go on in perpetuity as long as the committee exists, right? This is a task force, and our work is very focused. And the way that I'm thinking about this is such. I mean, we've got two sort of points at which we're expected to report back to the board. One's around mid-October, or maybe just after mid-October, if we send them some update in mid-October, or maybe we'll be before the board, a week or so after to present on that update. And then the other one is in early February. It may be that some of the work that we've outlined here will start now or soon and need to go until February. It may be that we can take a look at a program like school resource officers, and we can do the work that needs to be done in exploring, analyzing, proposing alternatives within the next, I don't know, call it 2 months. And then at that point, we can pick up other work. And so what I want to do is, I think maybe the most effective way to do this is for me to put down what you all have shared as some potential areas that we need to focus on. Put that into a survey and have you all indicate the areas that you're most interested in serving. And there's a way that you could rank order them. And then what I can do is propose relatively small subcommittees of perhaps 2 to 3 members for each one. We don't need a ton of people to be involved in these subcommittees, I don't think. But it'll also depend on your own expertise and interest area, exactly how many people we end up with on any given topic. And what I'll try to do is use that information to create a timeline that spans from now until February. And maybe, and we'll address this together and figure out whether or not the timeline that I put forward is the right one, and then start to sort of move up or down. If we think we might need a little bit more time for a certain area, then we'll stretch that out on that timeline. If we think we can get that work done relatively quickly, we'll shorten it up a little bit. Can you all envision what it is that I'm talking about right now? Yeah. And so you all would get in your inbox through Devin, I'm sure, we'll work together to create a survey. You would, it would include what I have right now is this. And let me actually, I'll pop this in the chat, but I'll also read it out for folks who might be watching at home and do not have access to the chat. Okay.
Well, can you send it to all panelists and attendees?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
I think I just need to put this in a Word document real quick so that it shows up. Okay. I'm trying to avoid screen sharing so we can all see each other as we talk. All panelists and attendees. All right. And sorry if that looks a little funky in the chat there. So once again, what you'll end up seeing on that survey is a group focused on envisioning, another group that's looking at sort of these department-wide issues. I'm mindful of Kristen's final comment about measuring the efficacy of our public safety, and I'm wondering whether or not this department level analysis group ends up transitioning to that type of group going forward. But maybe we'll just include that as one of these on the list as well. And then those programs, again, I want to know if there are other programs that you think should be on this list. And you'll tell us by your own rankings if whether or not you think some are not as important and should go down the list too. We'll see that. And then that critical issues area, domestic violence, mental health, and homelessness being a couple. But if you have ones you want to add to that, it's important to get those out today so that we can include those in the survey. Chi-Chi.
Yeah, so I thought you mentioned there'd be 3 subcommittees, one on public engagement, one on sort of structure and program, and one on these specific, what do you call it, critical issues. I would say that the committee that's dealing with structure, the structure, would have the charge to look at all of the functions of the police and whether that could be reimagined. So, because I was looking at things even like the alcohol licensing, but we don't know if we want to re-examine that or not. So I would say that subcommittee should look at all of it.
Okay.
And we don't need to go into, specific functions like school resource or traffic enforcement.
Yeah, I hear you. I think what will end up happening is that we'll need to have, if that's the case, we'll need to have a lot of people on there in that one subcommittee, and they would need to break into a subcommittee to do that. Do you understand? Like, I think really what I'm trying to get is a couple people looking very deeply at one issue. Does that make sense?
That means that the subcommittee should have more people and probably have to spend more time.
Well, I think it definitely makes sense that, for instance, a subcommittee looking at school resource officers is going to want to bring in folks from the schools, meaning probably a school committee member. They might invite to join them. They might invite somebody from the administration to join them as well, so that they can better understand these issues. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's keep talking and let's get back to this with no final decisions yet. Mike?
Okay.
There's one thing, and I'm not sure whether it belongs here or with the reform committee, but it's I think it belongs here actually, which is that we have the police department hires people on the basis of civil service rules, and the civil service system was designed sometime around 1880, I think, in order to prevent political appointments from basically political appointees from taking over every time there was a change in administration and disrupting the ordinary operation of government. So it created a cadre of permanent civil servants, and it was extended to the police and fire departments in Brookline. It may have previously been extended to other departments as well. It is an issue in terms of who gets hired. And I think it's an important one, and it belongs somewhere.
It's a critical issue to be sure. Mel, my understanding is that the reform committee is going to be taking this up. Is that right?
That would be my suggestion. You know, whether the reform committee does or not, you know, I'll be pushing this particular issue. This has been a particular
Yes.
issue for me, but my sense is, hearing how the committees are evolving, I do believe it's more of a reform, a more specific legislative type of solution.
Okay.
Thanks. Michael.
I know I get confused sometimes with the other Michael in the group, but I did want to, this came up in the other committee with respect to the subcommittees that were being created. And I hate to jump in to kind of put the administrative aspect to things, but the subcommittees that are created and their meetings would be subject to the open meeting law as well. So I just wanted to make sure that that's known, so that if there are meetings, you know, they have to, you know, comply with the notice and the posting requirements that are subject to the open meeting law.
Right. And that all needs to get coordinated through Devin so that we can make sure that agendas are posted and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, what you won't be able to do is decide, hey, can you meet this afternoon?
Yeah.
You're going to need at least 48 hours before you can host the meeting. Well, the agenda needs to be posted at least 48 hours ahead of time. So you're going to need to plan it even further ahead than that. Something to be aware of. Thanks, Michael. Anne.
One thing that's missing on the list that I think we should consider are kind of non-violent police emergency calls. Devin, I was wondering if maybe we could get the list of materials earlier than the night before. Maybe they were there. I was having trouble logging into the OneDrive account. But when I was looking last night at the list of emergency calls, 911 calls, I was noticing that there's a fair amount of them that concern kind of nonviolent issues in the community. So aside from mental health, aside from unhoused people, aside from the issues that you have on the list, Raul, I'm wondering if we should also look at those types of 911 calls to the police and whether there's alternatives for people to be connecting to in the community to resolve those types of issues that don't necessarily need to be called to the police. So I wanted to sort of wonder where that would go on this list, or is that a separate item, or how that would work?
Well, I've added it to the list. We can include it as a separate item now if we feel like, you know, once we get a sense of where we are after we get your feedback as a task force, you know, we may decide that maybe that's a good fit for one of the, you know, we do want to keep, at least at the onset, you know, I can't imagine more than 4, 5 tops. Remember, there are just 11 voting members on the committee, so we can only break into so many groups, and being mindful that while some of you may be interested in serving on more than one subcommittee, and that's fine. I'd like to keep it, if you are going to serve on more than one subcommittee, to 2 maximum. But I'm also mindful that you know, that you've got this commitment to us from 8 to 10, and a subcommittee commitment will be an additional commitment, and I don't want to go much further than that. That also, you know, this is why I think there may be an issue where if we say we're gonna have a subcommittee focused on the walk and talk unit, and we may be able to do that work in a month, let's say, then we can move on to another area that sort of wasn't one of the first 4 or 5 areas we were going to focus on, and then move on to that work, and sort of retask people at that time. Does that make sense? What I'll do is I've added that to the list right now, so you'll see that on the survey.
Okay.
Almas.
Yeah, just responding back to Anne, because I noticed in the notes from last time that Raul, that you talked about, that the calls for service, it comes under department level analysis. Are there calls for service that would generally elicit a police response that may be better handled by other means. So it sounds like you had included it in the department level analysis, if I'm reading your notes right. So just wanted to say that. And the other thing I just wanted to mention was I think someone, I think maybe Anne or Moni put in the resources list, which was great, which was Campaign Zero, which I really enjoyed reading because I think it'd be great for all of us to look at it because it had so many things in there about reimagining that I want to spend more time looking at it, and just wanted to mention that thank you. I think it was Moni that put it in, but it was great.
Yeah, it's a really great organization. Yeah, I think what you'll see too is once we get our subcommittees working, we'll have to figure out how to use this time because we're still gonna have these meetings. And of course there'll be subcommittee reports during this time, but it's also an opportunity for us to get together and discuss larger issues and consider, Campaign Zero is very focused on reforms, I will say, but there is some reimagining work as part of that organization and others that we should probably be talking about as a whole task force. Yeah. And Kimberly, were you waving earlier or you just hanging out? All right, good. Just I wasn't sure. Alexander.
Hi. So something that I was thinking about during the suggestion, I'm looking into nonviolent police emergency calls. And I wonder whether this falls under traffic enforcement. It may. Another major source of police contact is just regular street stops and especially automobile stops. And that may be something that we look into that falls under traffic enforcement in terms of program level analysis. But if we do, I think that's something useful for us to focus in on.
Yeah. So we said traffic enforcement stops. That cover it? Traffic enforcement / traffic stops?
Right, which usually don't end up having terribly much to do with traffic enforcement, is why I was wondering whether the police department considers that to fall under the traffic enforcement program.
Okay. Great. Anne.
Something that stood out to me just in passing on the emergency calls were calls about suspicious people. That was one of the highlights for me. And that was one of the things I was thinking about when I was talking about the nonviolent calls.
Right.
We all know what that means. So I think that might be a particular area to think about when we're reimagining where people go, or who people call when they're concerned about suspicious people. Right.
And we're gonna I know that that Dan has some data on that you already see the data. He'll be presenting on it in just a little bit. And that's certainly an area where we should be digging in. Bonnie.
You can rein me in certainly if this is moving beyond that, but there's a whole lot of collaboration with other police departments around Boston area. I don't know, maybe that's a half thought, but yeah, I'll put a tag in that, come back to it when it's a full thought.
Right. And this is an area that I know the board has indicated that the mutual aid agreements that the board wanted some analysis done on. I think the reform committee is going to be looking at this as well. They have their work cut out for them. They've got a lot to cover on their side. But I'm gonna keep a close eye on that one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike.
So the comment about traffic stops got something going in my brain. I've made the comment before that the police department, some of the things that we are concerned about and don't like in policing are really a mirror of what goes on in the minds of people in the community. So one of the question I have is, where do we factor in the impact of community attitudes on policing? If there's a substantial group of people who live in their view, very close to the city of Boston and its, and its attendant chaos in their minds, and they're concerned about one kind of policing. Some of that is going to be reflected in the attitudes of the police department of the officers. So, does that? Sorry. Turn that off. Does that? How does that play into to what we do?
Yeah, and I think the envisioning group is hopefully going to get at that. I will say, just picking up on our conversation last week regarding this potential survey that researchers at Tufts University are working on with Medford and Somerville, potentially interested in working with us as well. I'm going to be meeting with the PI, the principal investigator, early next week to talk a little bit more about that. And I should be able to report back at Friday's meeting about the results of that conversation and exactly what it would take, whether or not it's a good idea for us to get involved in that. And if so, what it would take for us to do so. Bonnie, I see you unmuting.
Yeah, I think when those issues come up, I think we don't just pile that information into our considerations. We question why. Someone living next to Boston would feel that way. What makes them feel like a line, an imaginary line on the ground makes them feel less safe? Because I imagine that's what you're implying.
Yes, that's exactly. And it's an irrational. At least
it's not irrational. It's racist. But
well,
we could have that conversation.
I would encompass racism under irrationality, but it certainly is. You're putting your finger on the problem when you call it racist, at least in some cases.
Go ahead, Bonnie, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what my point is that it would not be a gathering of that information. It would be a longer conversation before just including that information, because that's, I think, the heart of the problem here is people's perception of other people and then applying that to their public safety. And that's why that other communities are policed more heavily than, say, my neighborhood here.
I think that you need to understand attitudes in order to deal with the attitudes. So the data, I think a survey, if we can tag into it, that is blocked out by neighborhood would be very, very useful.
Yeah, there's no question that at least a fair amount of our policy is driven in large part by fear, and fear of loss, fear of others. And that's something we need to address, and we need to provide context for whenever presenting any data, for sure. I see a couple more hands. I'm mindful. I want to wrap up this agenda item by 9 o'clock, if not sooner, to provide ample time for Dan for his presentation and for your questions about his presentation. So I see a few more hands. Chi-Chi.
I had raised my hand right after Mike's initial comment, just to mention that I thought that was going to be covered in the first subcommittee, but the conversation between Mike and Bonnie raised a couple questions for me. First of all, I was just thinking that we may need to define the scope of each subcommittee more explicitly, because, well, first of all, the title envisioning, I didn't realize that was the sort of the community engagement piece of it. So I'm wondering if there's a better name, but more importantly, laying out the scope, because is it just doing the survey? Is it just some sort of assessment? Is it also not only assessment, but presenting the proposals of the overall committee or the task force? Is it trying to change hearts and minds? And so, obviously, if it goes through to all three functions, that's a lot to ask for a subcommittee that ends in January. So, it raises to question, each subcommittee, how much work they can realistically get done. What's the scope of their charge?
You know, I think it's so important to understand too that just because we have a subcommittee doesn't mean that it's only their work to do. So it may be that we have a few folks, and maybe this ends up being one of our larger subcommittees where someone has this, you know, a couple people have this as their primary responsibility, and a couple others have this as their second subcommittee. But certainly, you know, my view would be their role would be to craft the plan, and the role of the larger task force would be to comment on, refine that plan, and help improve the plan. And that there'll be opportunities for us all to engage as part of that plan. You know, I don't know if others think differently about that, but that's how I can see making sure that it's not just the role of just a couple, because frankly, all of the other subcommittees and the larger task force are going to benefit from the work of the envisioning, and actually not just benefit from it, but need to be driven by the work to really understand community concerns and how folks in the community, particularly those folks whose voices aren't often represented in town meeting, at select board meetings, and elsewhere, you know, how they would like, how they perceive public safety and what they want to see in our community. So I don't know if that gets at your question, but that's not all right, Chi-Chi? She's just laughing. I don't know if that's good or not, but let's get it going. Let's see how it plays out, and let's make adjustments. Is that fair?
Okay, fair enough.
All right. All right. 8:53. Alexander, I saw your hand was up, then it's down, then it's up again. What say you?
Sorry about that. I was initially going to comment on what Mike said, and Bonnie pretty much covered it, and then I had a different thought, which is just briefly, because one thing I've had on my mind is that if we want to suggest changes that can be included in the 2021 budget for town meeting, my understanding was that the deadline for that would be putting something out at our October recommendations, which is coming up extremely fast. And I wonder if there's some way to build into the expectations of each subcommittee or the expectations of our overall Friday meetings, that we have certain steps or shorter term goals in place to make sure that if we have some recommendations that do include anything about money, that we're prepared to actually present that in October.
Right. Hey Mel, if you're with us, I wanted to ask what and I'll ask it slowly as you come back. There you go. I wanted to ask what what's the latest that the select board could propose a change to town meeting for the budget items that'll come before us in November?
Well, there's the latest, right up to town meeting, really. I think the advisory committee obviously wants to have an opportunity, along with the select board, to review those in advance of town meeting. You'd have to prepare a motion. We will be doing this as part of the select board's process about the budget. So there'll be proposals, and if you have one, I just don't know the specific.
Right.
Let me say, I'm getting a text from my crack staff here.
Well, good.
Probably last week of October. How's that?
All right. So we want to get something to the board if there are any proposals, and frankly, it's a tight deadline for us, based on when we got started, to be able to propose something budget related. There may be something though, but it looks like we're going to need to get that in advance of the end of October, so the board has an opportunity to digest it, to discuss it, to take public comment, and potentially vote a change to the budget. So depending on the scope and scale of it, of course. Does that make sense, Mel?
Yes.
Can I just comment on that?
Yes, please.
Well, I think if it's a relatively minor change, then I think sure, aiming for there's a budget adjustment for the current fiscal year in November. The bigger objective, it seems to me, is to look at the budget for fiscal year 2022, which starts on June 30th or July 1st of next year. And the entire budget gets gets reviewed and reworked, as opposed to some adjustments which are occurring in November. There's a lot more. There's a very substantial part of the budget is very difficult to change, very much fixed, very much dependent on personnel, staffing, and so forth. But there's a lot more to work with in terms of flexibility when you're looking at the whole budget, as opposed to looking at a budget that needs to be adjusted to fit changes in revenue and expenses that are COVID related. That's what we're going to deal with in November.
Okay, great. Alexander, does that get at your question?
It definitely does, and thanks to everybody for clarifying that. I still do think it would be useful for us to put in one thing that's been slightly concerning to me, and I know that's just part of the first few meetings. You know, we're figuring ourselves out and finding our feet. One thing that's been concerning to me is that I would love to see a clearer set of specific goals for timelines for when we expect to have some answers to some of our own questions, right? And we're dealing with enormous issues that are just really difficult to tackle. But I think if we, at least for me personally, the way my own brain works, and maybe everybody else is simply more organized than me and can do this type of thing without smaller deadlines set over the course of many months. But I think it might be useful to have check-in points for the type of work that we're doing. And then also just quickly to apologize that I needed to turn off my camera. I'm having some difficulties over here this morning.
No problem at all on that. I agree. Let's make it part of our work at next week's meeting. Once we've got our, who's going to be focused in what areas, to make sure I'll provide a draft that we can work off of on a timeline. And then, you all can, propose adjustments, and we can make adjustments as a task force. So I'll make sure that we look at sort of check-in points, and then also maybe even when we expect maybe a more focused task force on one specific issue area might be able to finish their work even before the completion of the larger task force work. So I'll make some recommendations, but just something that I can put out there that you all can make changes to. All right. Almas, it's 8:59. Go for it.
I'll just take a minute. No, I just wanted to follow up. I had the same question that Chichi had about this envisioning committee, because I'm still honestly not terribly clear about it. It's sort of about community engagement. And so I understand, Raul, where you said that, okay, we're going to be kind of, we'll talk through it a little bit more, but I just wanted to say that because I'm still not very clear about that committee.
Okay. Yeah, I think we need to flesh that out a little bit more. There's a lot there, but I think it might take some time to figure out exactly what that work is going to be. Malcolm, do you have something like that?
Well, I think I just really wanted to point out that in those committees, there was nothing that explicitly asked us to think about race, which has been the precipitous for a lot of these movements nationally. And I think even in Brookline, when we talk about reimagining, there's a racial component that I feel is very pronounced, if not the driving component. And that includes in Brookline. And so I just noticed that, and it was more out of fear of us getting so wrapped up in work that we forgot to examine that. I'm not exactly sure where it should fit, because I actually think it permeates all of the possible committees. But I think I just wanted to put that out in an explicit way, that and that just personally I have a real fear, because I think from my personal experience, there tends to be a lot of deflection from race, and we'll move it to economics, or we'll move it to certain other things at different times. And so I just wanted to make sure we're explicitly finding a way to include it. Even though, and part of the reason I put it in the check is I also don't have a specific place to put it. But I was fearful we would take a look and start committee work and then be like, oh crap, there's nothing about race.
I think what we need is maybe something, and let's talk right now, Malcolm. Some kind of statement that indicates that for all of the work that's happening in all of the subcommittees and the larger task force, that the policies we recommend, that we ultimately recommend, and the consideration we need to have as a result of that, is that the policies we recommend need to center the experiences and views of Black and other people of color in our community, and that we're not going to produce any policy recommendations that we don't believe are going to improve the experience of those folks who live in and around Brookline. I would even add to that. But does that get at it? Maybe we need to craft a statement like that is a guiding statement for the work of everybody. And so as you're having a conversation, whether it be in your subcommittee or we as a task force, we say, well, how do we know? How do we know how do we know that's working, police department? How do we know our solution is better, task force? Does it center Black people and other people of color at the heart of what it is that we're proposing? Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me, because I do think, it's hard for me to locate race amongst those committees. I think it actually belongs in all of them. And so, and I can concede that's personal. But I think, in doing that, yeah, and I like the added language. I think part of the thing, whether you believe it's reality or reputation, is the idea of people talking about driving while Black and police talking about a lot of traffic from the three angles through Boston. I remember Rasan Hall at an MLK ceremony also mentioning that while we see that in Brookline, we don't see it in other neighboring towns like Milton and others where there's a lot of traffic coming through. So, I think something about, people of color who come through, and also being mindful of what that means. I'd be okay with that. I think a blanket statement would help.
Okay. I'm happy to take a crack at that, but I'd like to offer if someone else would like to take a crack at such a statement instead. But if no one else will, then I certainly will. Anybody want to take a crack at that?
How soon do we do that? I assume probably by next week.
I think it'd be helpful to be able to review next week.
I'm willing to combo with somebody. The beginning of schools has me a little bit
I hear you.
hesitant to commit to a whole lot right now, even a paragraph.
I see Alexander's
Yes.
hand up. You may have
Yeah.
some backup coming.
Okay, I'm certainly willing to co-author or co-work with someone.
Alexander?
I'm very happy to help out and help shoulder the work. I do not think I should be in charge of that statement, given how extremely white I am. One thing I do want to flag about these statements, I think it's a good idea. I've also seen in a number of organizations people using these kinds of statements almost as a shield against themselves of having to actually do the work. And so while I think this is a useful thing to do, I want to extremely agree with Malcolm that this needs to be at the forefront of our minds and of every conversation and every committee, right? Like just putting the statement out there and then leaving it alone isn't going to get us very far.
Fully agree. And I'm mindful of the time. Bonnie, go ahead.
Be quick. So what if it was not a statement, like an outward facing statement? This is an accountability thing where we're tacking this up on a chalkboard, and that every thought that we have, every decision, every recommendation, we look and say, does this center people of color, Black voices, communities that are over policed, period? Or maybe that needs to be more fleshed out. But like, I think this is about our accountability, not like declaring who we are as a committee. Does that make sense?
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
oh, go ahead.
invite people to check us on that.
Fully agree.
So this goes back to the idea of having each subcommittee have a charge or a scope of work. It could be woven into that. So for example, the envisioning or community engagement subcommittee could say, talk about, assessing the attitudes of Brookline residents, including race, oversampling of BIPOC folks, Brookline residents, in terms of looking at the department and its functions and restructuring, how to do that with a racial equity lens. And I'd be happy to try to take a crack at each charge and then to weave something with racial justice through it. Usually in work like this, I'd run it by you first, Raul, as the chair, but I don't know how that gels with the open meeting law.
I mean, I would say, regardless of open meeting law, I think it's, I'm always happy to, take a look at things ahead of time, but, I think it's important that the entire task force be able to weigh in on anything anyway, as we're all going to be doing the work. I'm okay with that. I mean, there's two ways to do this. One is to do it the way you proposed, and which does require somebody to step up and be willing to do that. And so
I'm willing to do that.
That's
over the weekend.
So maybe we'll stick with that way. The other way is to sort of create the subcommittees and then have them propose a charge to the larger task force. Go through all that. It takes a lot longer to do it the other way. So if you're willing to do that, at least put something down on paper, then we can decide on. Then that's helpful. Do you feel like that's something, if we get the subcommittees decided relatively quickly, meaning I'm going to try to get this survey out to everybody today. I think I have a sense of where we're going to end up, but I could be surprised by your responses. But I can turn that around, Chi-Chi, to you very shortly after, or Devin can, very shortly after. And you'll have a sense of what the subcommittees are and maybe start to construct something that we could reflect on next week.
Sure.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I do want, after next Friday, by the end of next Friday, I want to make sure that we know what subcommittees we have right now at that moment, and that those folks are ready to go off and start to meet, to at least have their first organizing meeting to figure out how they're going to tackle whatever's in front of them. So I want to make sure that we leave next Friday ready to go. I'm also mindful that after next Friday, the very next thing that's going to be happening is the September 30th public hearing, the joint public hearing between us and the Committee for Policing Reforms, which means that our following Friday meeting is likely going to be very focused on sort of talking through what happened at that public hearing, which means that in that sort of 2-week span or so, a lot of the work really is going to be done at that subcommittee level. If you all can envision that in the calendar. Okay, so I'll get that turned around as quickly as possible. You all can expect this afternoon to have a survey in your inbox. It'll be, Devin will get it out. I'll work with her to create it. That will ask for your preferences in terms of subcommittee work, and we'll take it from there.
I did want to quickly just jump in and say, Michael just beat me to it, but you can email myself and Raul directly. Any member of the committee can. I'm appreciative. All of you have been super careful about emailing individually, and we really appreciate that. So you can feel free to email Raul and then copy me on it, so we have a record for the group. And then I just want to remind everyone, if you are going to use the chat feature, to not only chat to all panelists, but all panelists and attendees. So the folks who are participating in the meeting can see what you're saying in the chat function.
Yes, please. Thank you. And by the way, it's just as chair, it's very difficult because I'm focused on who's talking. So it's very difficult for me to pay attention to what's happening in the chat. So I don't know if you need me for anything that's happening in there, but just know that I'm paying attention to the squares in front of me. And final words, I've got to move on.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention a conflict that I don't know. I'm a new town meeting member, so maybe this isn't important, but I got some email last night about a TMMA board meeting at September 30th at 7 p.m. Is that? Is that a conflict for town meeting members, or can I just ignore that meeting and what?
You know, there's all kinds of conflicts. I'm not sure. I saw that too. Yeah, I mean, we can look at the timing and see if it makes sense. But I know we've been talking about hosting this meeting for a while, and I think we were just made aware of that TMMA meeting just yesterday. So, yeah, here we are. I'll look into it. Okay, thank you, everybody. I know we're a bit over the time that I had said, but that was not a diversion. That was an important conversation that we needed to have. That is going to improve our work going forward. So, so thank you to everybody, for your thoughts and comments and making us better. So Dan, I'm gonna have you take it away. We asked, and Dan has delivered a presentation, and I won't do too much intro because of time, but I want to make sure, Dan, that you have enough time to present what you have prepared, and that we all have enough time to ask questions about it. So let's go ahead and go through it. Dan, you let us know if and when you want questions throughout, or if you'd like to get through it and then have us reflect afterwards. I know that can be more efficient sometimes, but as you go, let us know.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Excuse me. Just before we start, over the years, we've done a lot of activity towards reducing the crime rate in town. And just going back, say, 25 years, crime has been reduced in the high 60% from where it was back in 1995, 96. A lot of that is reflected in the printouts, in the statistics that we were releasing since 1997, and you can see a decline. And that was accountable for a couple of reasons. I'll just touch on one of them being I think our relationship with a lot of members in the community got better over those years. I thought by doing that, we were encouraging people to call the police station when they had concerns, when they had crime in their neighborhood, and we wanted it reported so we could track it and try to do something about it and to eliminate it. The proof was in the numbers going down. It also allowed us to concentrate on other areas. From the conversation this morning, you hit on a lot of areas that the police department has in relationship with the community. I think a lot of those programs and relationships that are developed took years to develop. I think the police department probably does more than a lot of area departments, a lot of departments across the country. And I think one thing that I would hope everybody would consider is that the relationships that are built between the members of the police department and the members of the community are extremely important to everybody, not just to police and not just to the community, but to everybody, because it's all about, a lot of it's about public safety, and a lot of it is about quality of life. And we shouldn't forget that. And my biggest fear personally is that if too much is looked at or too much is taken away from the police that we have spent years building up and dealing with, relations are going to suffer more than they're suffering today. And I'll use an example on how we handle the mentally ill. It goes back to probably about 2010, 2011. As a group of chiefs, some major city chiefs in Massachusetts, we took a look at our staffs and we asked members of our staff to contribute their expertise to certain areas. And we had 2 officers who asked to work with the homeless in Boston and dealing with drug addicted people. So that really started us towards building up on handling the mentally ill. Other things happened, an officer involved shooting, other things that actually caused us to really take a look at mental illness and how we can handle them better, and developed into where we are today. Now, today we have a group of people that want to do it, and we also have the entire department, with the exception of six new ones that have received the extensive training in handling those with some problems that have to be dealt with. Now, we deal with it, the police department deals with it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I think if you take a look at it, it's a critical function that we perform, the department performs to the town. We have one social worker that works, but it's a day job. It's Monday through Friday, regular hours. So I'm not going to say how I would want that to be handled right now, because I have my own ideas. But I think it's critical, like what was said earlier today by Bonnie, that if you look to take something away, you have to figure out what it's going to be replaced with. And that's an important function that we provide. That's an important function our officers do. An offshoot to that is everyone's has Narcan. Everyone knows there's a lot of opiate addiction. Unfortunately, it affects a lot of people. We've saved a lot of people using Narcan, and we've had them in our cars and our officers trained since 2014. So you just have to look at the whole. I just ask that you look at the whole thing, because a lot of people are affected by it. So I'll get off my soapbox and just go on for a minute. These Part A crimes is what we judge a lot. They're the most accurately reported crimes that we have, and that's what we're judged about when we talk about comparing our crime rate to other areas of the state. Just one other note. There was talk about the police departments and the relationships with other departments. I have to say, in my opinion, our police department cannot function by itself. I know we talk about being surrounded three sides by the city of Boston. I know we talk about Newton on one side, but everybody has a car. Everybody has access to transportation, whether it's a car or bike, foot. And it's critical that police departments talk to each other and learn what's going on in neighboring communities and other communities. And you know, you talk about, people talk about Boston, and the police do as well. But not too long ago, we had a major group in here breaking into banks overnight, taking ATM machines, making off with a lot of money. And they were from, I don't know, 30, 40 miles away out in Lawrence where they came from. And so in order to provide the highest amount of public safety that you possibly can, you have to talk to other offices, you have to talk to other departments, you have to train with other departments. Brookline trains not only with area departments, but the schools that are in here, the colleges, just to try to increase everybody's safety. So a long way to lead into the idea that crime has been reduced over 60% over the last 25 years. And I don't want to get too bogged down in the stats, because if you took a look at the 18 and 19, at least the 18 and 19 annual reviews that we put out there, they're pretty detailed. They talk about the amount of crime that we've had. They talk about the clearance rate. They talk about a lot of things there. And you can see that most of the crime has been in decline. Violent crime was down about 15% over that year. And Brookline is in my opinion, is a safe community. And I think it's not only the police department, but it's the police and the community working together. So that, if anyone has specific questions just on those crimes and how they handled, I can answer those.
Why don't you continue on first, and then
okay.
let's hold questions for the end. Please write them out so you don't forget your questions, folks.
Okay, then I'd like to move on, which I think a lot of people had a lot of questions about, is our calls. Now, our public safety dispatch center handles almost all of the calls coming into the police station. It handles all the 911 calls. It also handles all the fire calls. It also handles the medical calls that will eventually end up with Fallon Ambulance. But beyond that, it also takes most of a lot of our business calls that come into there. I could not get the stats for the years for business calls that came in, which is over the 222 line and those lines. The town only keeps them, or we only keep them for 60-day intervals. So, 30-day intervals actually. So we were unable to get the amount of calls that come in beyond the 911 calls. So the dispatch center is run by civilians. That's been that way since 2002. They're highly trained. There's 15 dispatchers, E911 dispatchers, 1 supervisor. They're trained in everything from call taking, from how to triage a call, to how our department tracks calls. It's a very technically challenging position. They're required to have a good memory. They're required to multitask, and they're required to learn how to de-escalate people that call that are either struggling themselves or want to talk about something that's going on, and they can try to help them out. Most of them, and I don't think it's all of them because of the new people that are coming on, are fully medically trained to medically dispatch, to triage a medical call. When somebody comes in, say that somebody collapsed and nobody breathing, and they can talk them through getting that person on the CPR and things like that. So that's basically a quick overview of it. I think Darius, who is our supervisor, did a pretty good report that is attached. That's part of the package that everybody got. And he talks a little bit about the training that they get, the dispatchers get, and that. But in the interest of time, there's several lines that come into the department. One of them is the business line, which I talked about. And then you see another one is called a phone, 7-digit phone line. And that's because not everybody in the state can have cell phones directed to their call centers. So there might be people that are outside of Brookline and trying to get a hold of 911 thinking they're going to get Brookline, but they're not. And it goes out to Framingham State Police and then gets routed back to the PD. Right now, most of the cell phone calls that originate in Brookline do come to our center. And we're one of the few, not few, but one of not a heck of a lot of departments across the state that have that capability. We started picking up over the last year or two text to 911 into the station. There's not a lot of that activity with us. We do have the number of the calls for text in a chart as part of this report. And you see it's minimal because it fortunately is not being used that much. Each dispatch center like this one is staffed depending on the time of the day and the day of the week. We also have to have a backup. Our backup is Boston Police, where we have our own setup like you see here for Brookline Police there, that if it's a planned outage or if it's an outage that we have and we need to put people into Boston, we have our own locations over there. Our phones will get rerouted there and we'll do our dispatching out of there. That's happened on a number of occasions. Fortunately, a lot of it has been planned outages and upgrades that we have to shut down for a while and we dispatch out of Boston. Which takes me, if you can move over, if you have on the numbers of calls that we have. When I talked about those 7-digit emergency calls, there's 553 at 18 and 18, 868 and 19. But our voice calls where the numbers are, we also have the voice calls coming in and the text calls, which in total, the 911 calls for 18 was 15,600, and 19 was 18,198. Now, just to talk a little bit about what we don't have for everybody is that we don't have the type of calls that are received over our 911 lines. Those aren't tracked. The number of calls that come in are all tracked, but we can't tell you that the call that came in resulted in a police responding to a multiple car accident. We can't tell you, we can't tell you things like that because we just track the numbers, and then we have a CAD system where we track what calls go out and what the result of those calls are. So I know that when you talked earlier in your meeting about the numbers of calls that I gave you, the types of calls that I gave you, they came in over any line. Most of them came over the business line. Not every one of them, I'll be honest with you, does not come over the 911 line. And there are certain calls that we could get calls on both lines. Say it's an accident, we'll get call on both lines, people reporting over 911 and people reporting over the business lines. So it's very hard to track exactly. I think we'd have to change training and change some computer stuff inside the station. So if you have that chart in front of you, we have the computer aided dispatch entries that are made as well. Total each year in the dispatch center was for police and fire is 76,495 for 18 and 78,288 for 19. I didn't, for a reason, go to 2020, which they have the 6-month stats, basically because of COVID-19. It kind of, I don't have to explain to anybody, but interrupted a lot of the stuff that had been going on. Then it gets into the calls by reason. And what I asked for when I asked the IT people was to get basically the top number of call activities that we get based on calls from the dispatch center, and then a second set of calls that are basically police initiated for the most part. But so the first set was when it says 2018, 2019 common calls entered by call reason. Those are a high number of calls that we get to the station out of everyone. So you see burglar alarms. Burglar alarms are over 2,200 each year. And it has a breakdown under the heading burglar alarms of the types that come in. So you can look at that, and that's how these numbers, the numbers play out. Medical emergencies are very high, over 4,000 each year. And then it goes and it breaks down. Those are your high numbers that you're getting going through there. And then I'll just call your attention to the last page. We said other high volume calls for service and officer initiated activity. I got to apologize for that. My eyes aren't that good. I can't see it either. That's why we submitted this other thing. And Raul called it to my attention yesterday. So thanks. That's why we put this last chart out. But here you have, we ask our officers to call off on most of the traffic stops. There's the number of traffic stops called out. The STARS assignment, that's actually anywhere from handling a community complaint to a crime trend that we see happening that we put officers at. Anything that requires follow-up by officers. It used to be, before days of computer, it was all paper, as everybody knows. Right now it's all computerized. So if you're in a neighborhood and you say there's cars speeding down St. Paul Street, and we open a STARS assignment, we expect officers to be devoting some of their time on St. Paul Street to reduce the number of speed to see if it happens. And their activities are logged in the computer, so supervisors can make sure that the officers are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. Traffic posts, I explained a couple of meetings ago that We have assigned traffic posts in the evening from 4:45 to 6 o'clock. Some high trafficked areas like in Coolidge Corner, Longwood and Harvard Street, and some of them and some others, but a lot of those traffic posts are also school traffic posts. We handle the management of the school traffic supervisors, and when one of the supervisors are out, our officers that are on duty get assigned to those posts. Building checks kind of speak for themselves. It's all town buildings that get checked during the nights. Make sure that there's nothing wrong with the buildings. Animal complaints are call driven. We do a lot of well-being checks and follow-ups and funeral assignments. We do as a public service, when requested, we will have a police cruiser go with funerals from here to the town line or just over the line into some of the cemeteries that are nearby. And that's usually at a family request. So those are basically what these two charts mean. I think I could probably do a better job to answer specific questions. If I'm sure you're going to have some. Hope you'll have some.
All right, I'll get us started. If we can turn off screen sharing, and everybody on the task force should have. And by the way, the packet also has access to this presentation, but you all should be able to see this on your own. And so maybe if you need to refer back to a slide, can open it up on your own. Chief, I just want to start. And this is really helpful to see it. In academic research, we talk a lot about differences between correlation and causation. You mentioned a 65% decline in crime rates over the last 5 years. And as we look out further, go ahead. Did I get that wrong?
25 years.
Over the last 25 years. Sorry about that. And according to the chart I saw, this is the lowest. 2019 was the lowest overall crime rate for these Part A crimes in the entire chart that I was able to see looking back some 20 years. So my question is, there are a lot of factors that go into why crime exists. I mean, one major factor is the economy, certainly, and availability of social services. I mean, you name it, right? There's any location, there's any number of factors that go into crime rates. I guess my big question is, during this time period, the size of the police force has increased, and even as the crime rate has gone down, there's two ways to view that. One is to purport that the crime rate is going down in part, at least, because of the size of the police force, training, things like that, prevention. Another way to look at it is to, someone else might see it and say, well, our crime rate is way down. Police may have played some role in that, but certainly, there are other factors at play here. Why do we need a police force that is X percent bigger when crime is down 65% over a time or some smaller amount over a shorter time? What do you think about that?
Well, over the years, the size of the department hasn't really gone up. I know that we had 4 grant funded positions from the Clinton administration till about 2009, when we had that economic fall. Those got eliminated. So we went from 140 to 136. And then just recently, it went up 3 to 139. So those numbers have been pretty consistent. They were consistent over the time I know that I was chief, where we were either at 140 or 136. As
Chief, are you including all current personnel or all positions?
Positions. I know that there's currently 10 vacancies within the police department.
Okay, so to the larger question.
With the reduction of crime?
Yeah.
I think policing plays a role. I can't say that it is the only reason, because it's not. I think a lot of things that we were able to pick up when when crime got reduced, helped us an awful lot. You talk about, there's mentioned earlier today about the CERT team. CERT team was formed by a couple of members in the police department. We have a highly motivated group of residents that know us a lot better than they did prior to joining the CERT. I think the community programs that we have, trying to get, get people to know us better, like I said earlier, and there's a lot of value in people understanding that police officers were kids once, that police officers grew up. And I think that all of that adds to a safety of a community. I don't think you can separate it, saying that it's just the police that reduce crime, because that's not true. And I just think there's a whole lot of factors involved.
Okay.
I think it's big that our officers have been invited into the schools. I think it's big that our officers coach kids, both at the grammar school and high school level. And I just think that's an enhancement of a community and a police department. But
thank you. Excuse me. I'm gonna go with Chi-Chi and then Mike. And Mike, just so you know, I'm when you're not speaking, if you could be muted, you've got some white noise for some reason on your line, and so when you're unmuted, we can all hear it. But we'll go Chi-Chi and then Mike.
Thanks, Earl, and thanks, Chief O'Leary, for the presentation. I just wanted to make sure my understanding was correct on some of these slides. So with respect to slide number 5, you've got about between 16 and 17,000 911 calls by voice. And then slide 6, you have about, for 2019, about 35,000 dispatches. So is it correct that most of or over half of the dispatches are not due to 911 calls, but to these other factors you laid out in the slide after, the 2 slides after with the small print?
yes, I would say the majority of our calls are business calls over the business line, not over the 911 line.
I'm sorry. I wasn't.
I would say the majority of calls that come into the dispatch center are over the business lines. They're not over the 911 lines.
The business lines not being the 7-digit number, but being like alarms and
it's
and
that
such.
number. It was the number that I told you we couldn't get the 2 years of data from because the town doesn't keep it. It's the 730-2222 number. That's our business line that the majority of people call on to get dispatched. You'll see that we only had, I think maybe an easier way to do it is we only had 15,600 911 calls, but we had CAD entries, which is call entries into our computer system of 76,000 that year.
Dan, is that what some of us would refer to as like the non-emergency line, even though somebody may use it to call an emergency? Okay, go ahead, Chi-Chi.
So, because the slide before that shows that 730-222 number only has a small number of calls. So you're saying most of the calls to that number are not actually kept or recorded?
No,
or, I mean, statistically, for statistics.
We made a request to the town. They keep 30-day intervals. So the most I could have gotten from the town was a 60-day and the last 60 days. So it did not go back as far as we had hoped. So we have no idea how many calls come in over the 2222 numbers, the 222 line.
And then that 222, so the statistic on slide 5 showing numbers for the 222 line is actually not correct. because it doesn't include a lot of what the town doesn't keep statistics on.
Right.
Okay.
That may, I'm not, I'd have to double check that one. But I did not get the total amount of calls for that line. So,
Okay.
so
that statistics is incorrect. And were you saying earlier that the reason for the calls to 222 lines predominantly are attempts to call 911, but because of the cell phone systems, they don't come in properly, or?
no, it's if you had a parking complaint in your neighborhood, you wouldn't call 911, you would call the 730-2222 number. 911 is supposed to be just for emergencies. Any other calls go to the business line.
Okay.
So it's separate altogether.
So half of the officer dispatches then are for non-emergency calls to the police department.
Non-emergency, non-911 generated calls. I don't know if they're emergencies or not. That would have to be a guess. I think I said that we do not track where all the calls come from and whether it's a 911 or a business call line.
All right, so
we don't know where all the emergencies come from. It's a combination of both.
Okay. But it would not be a bad guess to think that calls for nuisances, loud music, suspicious person might come over the 222 line.
Yes, it might come over both lines.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to just quickly flag is you gave statistics on crime rates in Brookline. I think I did see, and I apologize, I should have gotten the link and sent it to Devin, a comparison by the patch of crime rates in Newton, Cambridge, and Boston. And what struck me is that our crime rates were closer to Newton than Boston and Cambridge. Is that your understanding as well?
I without seeing it, yes, I would say so. You're dealing with, actually Brookline's the only town in there. Everything is a city. The other three are cities. I think a lot of it is driven by the population and everything. I don't know the numbers of population in the other three communities off the top of my
But
head.
these are rates per capita. These are not absolute numbers. So these are rates per capita. So the size wouldn't matter.
And we're lower.
Mm-hmm. We're more comparable to Newton than Cambridge or Boston per capita.
Yeah, probably, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Just if one thing, I also included in the documents that are in the folder is the raw statistics of all the calls. So I think it was Ethan. Was it Ethan that was going to look at them? So they're all in there for the 2 years. We just took the higher volume. So all the raw data is part of that packet of information that Devin put into the folder.
Chief, I'd like to understand, and we can let's figure this out, because most of our calls are coming in on this business line. Someone somewhere along the line has decided that it would be good policy to somehow track for a certain period of time, but then delete the information that's coming in on those lines. I don't know why that's a matter of good policy, but I'd like to understand where that policy is, and what we, I'm sure that that's something that we can change, but it makes it difficult for bodies like this that are looking backward to make meaningful recommendations when we don't have access to data that was kept, but then wasn't stored for some reason. So I'd like to get to the bottom of that. And maybe you and I can work together to figure that out and report back to the committee, to the task force.
We asked the town's IT department how far back they could go on the business lines. And that was what we got.
All right, let's figure that out. That's bizarre. So Mike had to go. He's got another meeting, but he did want to make the point that it seems to him, looking at the data, that a small percentage of police activity actually has to do with crimes. So that's something we should certainly look at. I want to go to others that have questions with the time we have remaining. Kristen.
Thank you. My question has a little less to do with the specifics of the data, and this may be something that ultimately we get to in subcommittee 1 about re-envisioning. I'm very mindful of, I don't want the backdrop of any comments or any questions that we raise about Chief O'Leary's or former Chief O'Leary's presentation to suggest we're all appreciative of and want to be in a town where the crime rate is reducing. I think ultimately, I'm considering some of the things that go along with a group whose perspective I appreciate. It's the Justice Collaboratory out of Yale, and it's the principles of public safety that need to be in place among them are legitimacy, dignity, and trust. And if we are achieving a lower crime rate, if we are achieving public safety in our town, it also has to be concurrent with the public sense of legitimacy, the public trust, and the public sense of dignity about the types of policing that we're using to achieve those outcomes. And I think I'm mindful, as well as a comment that you mentioned at the end, is that if the police enjoy being in the schools, that may be something that is enjoyed by the police, but it also has to be an experience that is both welcome by the people who are the recipient of the things that the police purport to do in our schools. And so I worry that we box ourselves into looking at data that tells us that this is either good or working, without then also considering what alternatives we didn't consider to achieve comparable outcomes in public safety.
If I could quickly respond to that, I agree with what you say totally. I think that is part of the reason, the dignity and the respect and the legitimacy is part of the reason why we put out so much statistical data over the years. We've been consistently doing it, and probably doing more today. I'm sure doing more today than we did 20 years ago. But that's part of not the transparency of the police department, is put the information out there. The biggest thing is, what do you compare those numbers against? You know, and I think that's what everybody struggles over. So the numbers are there, and the numbers have been there for 20 years for people to look at and to see what it is that we do. And then on the school thing, we wouldn't be in the schools if we weren't invited in. And I think that I think it's critical that the police department are part of the schools, because you know people are seeing the police officer in a different light, and I think we can't forget that's a benefit that the community gets, and I think the kids and the police department get as well, in particular. So.
Okay, Eitan.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out, so there's really like two competing theories of the world here. I think very good intention theories of the world. One is, it sounds like a view that, you know, the police seems to be doing a bunch of stuff that is not, you know, kind of emergency law enforcement kind of stuff. And are they the right, you know, local employees to be doing that? And the other theory of the world, which I think was the one, Chief O'Leary, that you kind of articulate, is that actually the more non-emergency, non-confrontational touch points the police force has in the community, the better that the emergency situations go. And I think I kind of want to understand from your perspective, Chief, whether that's a correct articulation of your view, and whether, you know, to what extent that kind of is baked into trainings that our officers or that our police leadership goes through. Is there a kind of a collective view among police officers that is the goal, basically, to have more personal contact. Police officers know more people's names. They're out in the community under the theory that it helps in emergency situations?
Yes, the answer to that is simple is yes. I think it's a misnomer, and it probably is a misnomer amongst some police officers as well when they start out, is that they're going to come in and be crime fighters. Policing is a service organization much more often, and you're dealing with more service-oriented calls than you are crime calls, and that's what it's been like forever. Now, I do understand that probably after 9/11, a turn was taken more towards being like they always talk about warrior versus guardian, and I think we kind of lost focus on being a guardian and turned towards being a warrior just because of what had happened in on 9/11 and how the trainings went differently then. But we got back, we kind of refocused our thing a couple of years later. So I think I agree with your second statement. I would say that police are much more times a guardian and a service-oriented organization than it is being a crime fighter.
It seems to me like, just as a quick follow-up, in some ways, it seems like this is an empirical question. In other words, does it help? Does it make people feel more comfortable? Does it actually de-escalate those situations? And because what's striking to me is it's really like it seems like a very, these are two different theories of what serves the same task. And it seems like the question is like, does it work or not? And so, my just own reflection right now is like, we need to know the answer to that question, is whether having more positive touch points in the community does actually help in the harder situations. And so any evidence we have on that point would be helpful one way or the other, I would say.
Well, can I ask you a question? In the beginning, didn't you mention about the police being at Temple Kehelet Israel to talk about security and concerns? Did you mention that?
I went to a couple meetings with them there. That's right.
How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I thought it was very positive. And, that was a situation where I think community members were really upset and stressed about security issues in light of synagogue shootings in the last, few years. And, I thought it was a very positive conversation. One of the critical pieces of information that I learned from that session, I think that actually the police encouraged synagogues in the community, for example, not to have private armed security because the police officers were actually concerned about the training, which is why last week I asked about whether the police department interacts or supervises private security guards. So I think in some ways, I think that was not only a positive experience, but a de-escalating one, in the sense that I think with different advice from the Brookline Police Department, more synagogues would be, hiring private security guards, which sounds like it may be a mistake. So I thought, altogether it was a positive experience.
We've got just 6 minutes left. I'll just say briefly, it's possible to believe that it's appropriate for the role of leadership in the department, meaning lieutenants and deputy superintendents and all the way on up, to meet with to faith leaders, school leaders, and others to discuss security protocols and plans and stuff like that, and still at the same time believe that maybe officers shouldn't be placed within those houses of worship or schools or elsewhere, or that maybe that should be the limit around engagement in those ways. But we'll be able to talk more about this. Bonnie.
Okay, I have a lot of questions. I'll try to. Do you know when the police were invited into schools?
I think we've been in schools since either the late 1980s or early 1990s. Late 1980s, probably. Started in the high school.
Do you know who invited the police into schools?
I know that there was a an agreement with the chief at the time, George Samad, and I'm not sure who the school superintendent, I don't recall her name, but I know that that was the first time to my knowledge that we were invited in.
Do you know why you were invited in?
I wasn't privy to that. I don't know.
Do you feel like you might understand why?
I would say it was probably just what I've been talking about, is to form relationships. Don't have only negative interactions.
Mm-hmm.
In the schools, you could have positive interactions with kids.
What do you think the children get out of having police in the schools?
They get somebody that they can talk to and somebody that they hopefully can trust.
Why do you think a police officer would be in that position or be the best person for that position?
I didn't say the police officer would be the best. I said the police officer would be in a position to develop that kind of relationship with a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe you can recruit some kids from the high school to join the police department at the same time.
Mm-hmm. How do you measure how your presence is perceived and experienced?
I think there's a difficult thing to do. I think that part of it measured is how the school administrators and teachers and counselors think about their interactions with the police, and think about how the police handle things in the schools. And I put it to you this way: police aren't supposed to be disciplinarians in the schools. But there are times when we learn about kids that are struggling that the school doesn't know about because they happen at night, or they happen within the family, or they happen on weekend. But it's critical that the schools know about that so they can do their jobs a little bit better too.
So is it right to say that the police inform the school about home situations?
I would say that's a loaded statement.
Yes.
I would say that if a kid is struggling and it's in the kid's benefit and we know about it, and there is a student in schools, the school should probably know about it to try to help them out, And this goes back a long time. I remember being down at the State House talking to some of the senators on an open hearing about the exchange of information. It doesn't, well, my opinion, it does a disservice to people that are struggling when one organization withholds information from another. So maybe some of these meetings that the high school has, that the police have been invited to, it's to talk about to help somebody that's struggling. It's not talk about to hurting people. And those kind of conversations go on all the time. And you got to look at what the bottom line is. Is the bottom line you're trying to help somebody or you're trying to hurt somebody? And I don't think the people that talk like that and talk to each other and get true information out or concerns out are there to hurt anybody. I mean, if you take a look at what's happened in the schools and what's happened in a lot of the times when we deal with kids not even in the schools, taking the schools out of it, we're not looking to arrest somebody and to give somebody a record. We know that kids make mistakes. We know we've all made mistakes. So we have a diversionary program that we've had in place for over 20 years. I'm sure our diversion numbers have gone up over the years. I think it's a wrong perception that the police are in there to do enforcement, because that's not what it's all about.
Before you go on, Bonnie, I just want to recognize that it's 10 o'clock. Can I get a show of hands if folks are willing to go to 10:15? We need to be able to maintain quorum to hear the remainder of responses to Bonnie's questions as well as Kimberly's. A show of hands of folks that can make it to 10:15.
I have a new Zoom meeting starting, but I can stay like 10 minutes.
If you can, that'd be great. Let's keep it to that time though. And so we'll have time for Bonnie and Kimberly. Okay, go ahead.
I don't mean to imply that the police has a negative goal. What I'm feeling around for or thinking about is the possibility of perhaps unintended consequences, the ability for someone to share information that they perceive one way when the reality might be another, that impacts a child's life enormously. So these are the things that I'm thinking about. Like when we say that it's beneficial to have this relationship in there, who decides that it's beneficial? And the difference between intent and impact is something to be deeply thought about. And I lost half my train of thought in the time check, but yeah, I think, you know, the answer to the question of how to measure the benefit of this is a really, really tricky one, and is not measured by numbers, not measured by a majority, because people who, communities that are over-policed are very much a minority in this town. So when there's an enormous amount of positivity coming in about the police presence in the schools, you know, that might be, you know what I mean? Like we need to focus on the voices of people who are over-policed and how they feel with police officers in their space that's supposed to be safe and supportive, because how I perceive a police officer standing next to me and how someone else perceives a police officer next to me is very, very different. And in the environment of school and learning that's supposed to be the most supportive, these are the things that I think about. Like what environment are we creating, whether or not the police department, and whether or not the goal is to be intimidating by the police department is maybe irrelevant, because the impact might be different. And I'm not making statements of what is true and what is not, but that is like, those are that's the essence of what we're examining here, public safety and perception of being safe and not being safe.
Right. I can see that, but I think that you have to look at the type of officers that are assigned in there and how they perceive their job. And then maybe you talk to some of the students and teachers and administrators and see what they think.
Sure. But also these people have a gun on their hip.
Well, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, that is part of the uniform.
Exactly.
And if something bad happens, they'll be expected to react. But how do we answer that?
I think it's gonna be an essential question for a subcommittee on police and schools and school resource officers, et cetera. Bonnie, you go with me moving on to Kimberly?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Kimberly, go ahead.
I hope I can remember my thoughts. I need to be at a 10 o'clock meeting also. Bonnie, great points. I wonder, one, let me just say that I do not agree with police being in schools. I don't understand the necessity of that. And I'm not sure what was going on in the 1980s that an administration would invite police officers in school. But if it was about showing that police officers are negative, or maybe building like some kind of community building, why wouldn't we do that at like a middle school or elementary level? Like, oh, let me look up to the police officer. I want to be a police officer when I grow up. That's where it should start, not in the high school. So one would argue that if you're putting police officers in the school at a high school level, you're putting them in there for policing. That's just my opinion.
But just to take that a step further, in Brookline, we are in the grammar schools. I mean, we have. I mean, back in the 80s, we started the DARE program, which we eliminated, and it's not there anymore. But our offices are in all the schools. It's not just the high school.
But did you start it in the elementary schools in the 80s?
The
I don't
DARE
think that's-
there was always a safety officer that went into the lower grades that I can remember. Safety officer was like talking about, you know, how do kids keep themselves safe crossing streets and things like that.
No, I understand that, but they were not.
The DARE program came in effect in the early 1990s, and we were in the grammar schools, grade 6, I think it was. But those officers also spent a lot of time in the school other than just teaching the DARE program. But the grammar schools, the DARE program started in the early 90s.
Okay, and also one other point that I just remembered, where are the police located in Brookline High School? Where are they?
I don't know. I don't know where they're
If I remember correctly, they're located in a place in the high school where the most, I'd say, like, I think it's in Malcolm, you are in the high school, so you can tell me if I'm wrong or not. They're located where ACE and MECCO and all of these programs are. This is what I heard. I'm not over there, so I'm not sure. Which again, why would they be located in that space and not in mainstream? Why aren't they located right outside of Anthony's office? So
Malcolm might be able to respond to that as someone who's in the schools right now.
I raised my hand, so Kim, I don't know if you want to finish your point and then I can come behind you. Yeah, so Chief O'Leary, I have some problems with the things you said, mostly because I was at Brookline High School in the late 80s. I don't remember any police presence. I graduated in 1988, and there's never been a woman superintendent. That was Superintendent Slater at the time, before Walsh came in. You might be referring to Dr. Jennings, who was the headmaster at the time.
That's who.
And that was also her first year. She only lasted 4 years. So she came in 1987. So it's kind of weird she would be asking for police support when she wasn't there very long.
But she was.
And what Kim is referring to is, I think, what we're thinking about with systemic issues. So there's also a state law to put a resource officer in the school.
Right.
It's not just an invitation. There's a state law for that. And that officer is placed directly across the hall from the MECCO office, which is also down the hall from the African American Latino Scholars Program, which is also right down the hall from the Step Success Kids. So the police officer is placed where the overwhelming majority of Black and brown kids in the school have central locations. And my point has always been, I'm sure there was a strategic thinking about where to locate the police officer. And I think Bonnie's point is, nobody really thought to say what was the messaging to children and families in placing that police officer there. I'm sure there was a strategic thing amongst the chief or somebody high ranking in the police and the superintendent and the headmaster, or maybe it was the building supervisor, which is the assistant headmaster. And I think at least what I'm taking from that is all y'all are white men who perhaps didn't think about what that means. And I don't actually have any problem with Officer Keneally. I think she's a good officer. I think she actually works to build relationships. But there's a greater message going out as well. There's a greater message going out to white kids when we say we have to place this police officer here. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that those things are being thought of as we go through these processes. And yeah, so I'm struggling with a lot of things to say. I mean, I've lived in Brookline, and you know my father, and you know, like some of this stuff is not actually adding up. And so I'm not doubting that Dr. Jennings asked for help, but I'm also curious, what was the precipitous of that? And, you know, it's the same when I hear like I have never felt like criminally unsafe in Brookline. I know we have crime. I know we're surrounded on 3 sides. Most of those sides actually connect to schools, frankly, the Fenway schools to BU. And I lived near BU when I was a kid. So when we say crime is down 60%, what does that actually mean? Did it go from like 6 out of 10 people being affected by crime to 3 out of 10? Like what's the end? Like, what is the total amount of crimes that we're saying are being reduced, right? Like, you know, and so stats are always easy to fit into what we want them to say. And so I know you said there's some raw numbers. I don't quite know how to see that. And so again, for me, these are some of the things that are sort of troubling, because we can look and point and say, well, here we have this thing and it kind of looks good and the schools and people agreed with that, but there is no evaluative system, as Bonnie pointed out, as well as nobody can seem to place the logic to how this thing happened. And so, yeah, I'm struggling with all that.
Well, I was not a participant in any locations. There was not an SRO when I was there. I don't think they had the office. So that's not. I'm not sure who made the decisions on it. I'm assuming it was the school administration. Going back, it was that lady Jennings that you had mentioned, and I know that was when we first started in the schools. The crimes, when you talk about the crime stats, we can go back. Our numbers, and I can account for the numbers when I was chief there, but they go back to 1997, and probably a couple of years before that too. And those crimes, the crime categories that I mentioned to you, the 7 this morning, those are the ones that we've been talking about being reduced.
All right, I'm gonna jump in here because clearly there's a lot to dig into, but you know we're already over time. I do want to just make one clarification here, is that the state statute, which I've shared in the chat there and folks can look up online, requires that there be the minimum is 1 school resource officer for the entire municipality, and it does not stipulate at all that officer needs to be inside the schools, but they serve as a resource, a liaison, if you will, to the school system. So decisions about having officers in schools is a different decision there. Chief, do you think I got something wrong there?
No.
Okay.
I just have to. Casey Hatchett, one of the sergeants with us, just texted me and she said, Chief, Anthony Meyer, Lisa Redding, and former Metco coordinator chose the location. We had no input.
Okay, we'll dig into it.
That's of the SRO's office, Malcolm.
Right. We'll dig into it. I do want to say, I know that there are folks that want to engage through public comment. As you can see, we're already over time just being able to have the task force members engage in the work right now. We will have opportunities for public comment in the future, public engagement. We have a hearing coming up. But if you do have any other thoughts you'd like to share with the task force, please send them to me and or Devin Williams, and we'll make sure that we get those to the task force so that they can be considered. And we'll try to provide opportunities in the future, time willing, for additional public comment. So thanks to everybody. We will pick this back up and we'll be in touch with you very shortly. Appreciate you all. Take care.